Welcome to today's Q&A. Today we're talking about Accessible Voting 101. I'm Hannah Satterwhite. I'm the Assistant Director of Advocacy and Education at St. Louis ARC, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Our discussion today is going to be led by Barbara Schoenbein of League of Women Voters. We're so happy to have Barbara here. And without further ado, we're going to turn it over. I'll also be sharing screen for our presentation today. Welcome, Barbara. Thanks for
Well,
being here.
well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. I just want to start out with one little FYI for all those listening and watching, is that I am totally blind. So occasionally I will say we and us, and that's why, because I am part of the disability community myself. I'm also the chair of the Voter Access for People with Disabilities with the League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis, and I'm also the co-chair of the same committee at the Missouri, in other words, statewide level. So I've got my hands all over this whole topic. So we're going to go
Absolutely.
ahead and begin. And I'm here to discuss an underserved voting community. People with disabilities need to know about voting options so they can vote. People with disabilities are growing as our population ages. Still, too often, many either have problems voting or do not know their voting options. All eligible citizens have a right to vote. But when we look at the big picture, citizens have a right to vote privately and independently. Private vote is a given for voters, but this is not always so if you are disabled. Knowing voting options helps with meeting the challenges of voting. Many people with disabilities are seniors with a range of health issues. Accessible voting helps seniors stay independent, and of course, this is very important. 1 in 7 voters with disabilities run into challenges voting. This can be for a number of reasons. It could be physical access, reading and marking the ballot, or needing assistance at the polling location. It is clear that if voting is accessible, more people with disabilities will vote. The national numbers show voters with disabilities vote at a rate about 4% less than that of the general population. In Missouri, people with disabilities vote at a rate 7.1% less than the general population. So we vote less here in Missouri. This does need to change. Many people with disabilities do not know their voting options. Education is the key here. If a voter knows their options, it reduces confusion and anxiety. Informed voters will likely cast a ballot. Here are the voting methods we have available. These voting options often are not discussed because a visible disability is not seen. The disability community is very decentralized. Most people with disabilities are not affiliated with a service organization like yours. Voting may or may not be discussed by that service organization. Of course, you guys are, which is awesome. This issue needs to have more space in our contact with the public. Many people know someone with a disability. If we share this information with the public, then they can share with someone they know with a disability. This is a way to spread the information. One of the permitted excuses for absentee voting is disability or confinement. This also includes a temporary situation. You might be having surgery or you're in the hospital, or it could be any number of reasons you might have a temporary disability. The 2 weeks of no excuse voting helps voters arrange a transportation schedule or other assistance. So this relatively new 2-week voting period is really a good thing for all of us with a disability. The only remote voting in Missouri is by mail. This option does not require notarization of your signature. The voter must complete an application to request an absentee ballot. Then once they get the absentee ballot, of course, you need to plan your time and prepare it and get it submitted. Be aware that the ballot must be in the election authority's office by 7 p.m. on election day. The postmark does not matter in Missouri. Other states maybe, but not here.
Barbara, was that a new change or has that always been,
It's always been
okay.
that way. The post office has changed some of the rules on how they postmark things. That's relatively new. But the actual rule, no, that's not new in Missouri.
Okay.
Eligible voters can request to be placed on the permanently disabled list. And what that does, that means you automatically get an application for an absentee ballot prior to each election. This is an option and not a requirement to get an absentee ballot application. Accessible in-person voting. All accessible voting options must be available for election day voting, absentee in-person voting, and the 2-week early voting. Every polling location must be accessible. Election authorities cannot just designate a specific site for voters with disabilities. So we can't be herded over to one spot. Okay, this slide gives an overview of what is meant by an accessible voting location. So you can see there's a lot of pieces to it, and it can be complicated. So I'll give you an example of how things can easily go astray. What if you have handicap parking, but it's at the far end of the parking lot, and the person might have trouble navigating that parking lot? So you've got to really look at everything. The voter can request a different assigned polling location, but election authorities should not use this as a way not to make polling locations accessible. Now, I need to add something here. If you live in St. Louis County, you already can vote at any polling location you want. If you live in St. Louis City, you can vote at any location you want in St. Louis City. That's not true for most of the rest of the state. So if you live in St. Charles County or Jefferson County or wherever, you have assigned polling locations. So this could be something that has to be done if you cannot vote because of lack of accessibility. Curbside voting. This one's had some problems. It's available for any voter, even if the polling location is accessible. Some examples of how that might be applicable include, let's say the sidewalks or the parking lot are broken up. We've all had that situation where we're walking on uneven parking lot, and if you don't are not stable, that would walking that could be an issue. What if you're recovering from a contagious illness like COVID, and maybe you feel pretty good, but you don't want to spread your illness? If you have any kind of health limits due to balance or the use of your legs, that could be another reason. Any disability reason can be. You don't have to have the ones I've enumerated. It can be any reason that curbside is the right one for you. There is not a specific law on how voters alert poll workers that this option is wanted. It would be great if a simple process was made available. In Missouri, they have not provided any guidance on this at all about how to alert the poll workers. Each voting location should have accessible voting equipment for all elections and not just for election day. That's been an issue as well. Accessible voting equipment is often used by those with vision loss, but it can be used by anybody at all. It doesn't matter. You don't have to have vision loss to use this, but anybody can use it. But the more common situations are someone like myself who's blind, and I hear a human sounding voice reading me the ballot. The election authorities provide headphones, or I can actually provide my own. Someone with limited vision can use large print and actually customize the device to fit their vision. People with limited use of their hands or a similar health condition, they're easy to use knobs or levers so they can mark their ballot. But again, anybody can use these accessible voting equipment. Another option is direct assistance from a person of the voter's choice who will accompany the voter in the voting booth. So you can take anybody you want to help you in the voting booth. Also, you can request help from the poll workers, and in this case, both a Democrat and a Republican will accompany you in the voting booth to help you mark your ballot. Now we get to my pet peeve. I have to have something. So, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And what's happened is this, where a well-meaning individual either promotes only one of the voting options and often does not even mention the rest of the voting options. Another situation similar, another well-meaning individual promotes one option as the best to the person with the disability. In other words, they're trying to lead you to a particular choice. A fair sharing of all voting options is the way this should be presented. There is not a way to know a voter's abilities or preferences. Respect the voter and don't gatekeep. So that's my pet peeve. So then and I've seen plenty of examples of it, by the way, of that. Slide 19 is our references for this presentation. So we had a lot of help with my entire committee putting this together. Slide 20 is where question time, but before I go to the question time, I'm going to provide a few reminders. The League of Women Voters has a website called Vote411, vote411.org. And you can get all kinds of voting information no matter where you are in the United States. And about 6 weeks or so, it sometimes varies slightly, you can actually look up your specific ballot and take the time to study it and make your decisions. You cannot submit that ballot, but you can use it for note-taking and decision-making. If you prefer paper, in the Metro St. Louis area, we have a voter's guide. It gets published in the Post-Dispatch, usually maybe 1 or 2 Sundays before the election. You can also get a paper copy at many libraries around that same time. It comes out, like I said, relatively close to the election. Also, if you want, you can call the League office at 314-961-6869. I'll repeat, 314-961-6869, and they can mail you one. And finally, you can reach me if you have more questions about this subject, and my email address is voteraccess@lwvstl.org, which I'll repeat, voteraccess@lwvstl.org. And so this concludes my presentation. I hope you found this information of help, and I'll try to answer any questions if I didn't do a completely clear job. So Take it
Thank
away.
you, Barbara. Well, we do have some chats and some questions, so I haven't read through them yet. I do have one to start us off.
Uh-huh.
Um, Also, the election protection hotline 866 Our Vote is written on your slide. So, would someone call that number if they get to their polling place and they realize it's not accessible, or, in what instance would they use that number?
That phone number is for any voter, not just for voters with disabilities, and you are correct. If you have a problem because of accessibility or any other voting issue, you call those folks, and the key point on this is call them while you're still at the polling location. Because once you leave that polling location, your chances of getting a vote submitted are going down dramatically. So while you're still there, call them up, explain the situation. They have all kinds of staff, including attorneys, to contact the election authorities around the state to help resolve whatever's going on.
Could you tell us a little bit more about League of Women Voters? Someone wants to know, is League of Women Voters nationwide?
Yes, we are. We've been around over 100 years. It was started with the women's suffragette movement back then, and it was formally organized right around the time we got the vote. And I always sad to say I can't remember what year it was. I think it was 1920 or 22, somewhere around there. And our purpose is to educate voters on the election process, voting information, ballot issues, but we are nonpartisan. So we don't support any candidate at all. So we provide information in a nonpartisan way. We do other things. We do support some issues related to the elections, but no, we don't support any candidates at all.
All right, we have a few other questions. Would your county look at polling locations for accessibility prior to approving them to be polling locations? Do you know?
You would hope so. Um, there is a wide range. See, different communities have different circumstances they're dealing with. For example, if you live in St. Louis County, that's one thing. It's a high population area. But if you live in rural county in Missouri, they might only have two polling locations. So
Hmm.
they're dealing with, and they might have a lot of older buildings
Hmm.
that really can't make accessible. So there's all kinds of things going on. I'm not excusing them, but we're dealing with reality here.
Right.
So yes, they should, um, because they're required to have all their polling locations accessible. But I'm aware that in reality, that's an issue. Now, it's not really a big issue in St. Louis County, and I think for the most part, it's pretty good in St. Louis City. I can't speak obviously for the rest of the state.
So they should, but it's not always perfect. And this goes along with the next question. What happens if you arrive day of and find the site not accessible? We did mention the number you could call for any issue, but
And
would
that's what I would recommend you do.
okay.
Um, in now again, if you live in St. Louis, well, I'll tell you a story. I ran into something a few years ago where the accessible voting equipment, there was a snag, and I won't go into what. So my friend and I were both kind of upset. So since we could go someplace else in the county, we just went to another place. Now, again, in a heavily populated area with a lot of different voting locations, just so you make sure you get voting done, you could do that, but I would still report it because it's important that this be addressed. But I didn't have the election protection phone number with me that time. That was silly on my part. But anyway, and that's what I did. But if you're in a county, like I mentioned earlier, other than St. Louis City or St. Louis County, you can't go any other place. That's it. So um, contact election protection and explain what's happening and what's going on. And
Mhm.
If they're not offering curbside voting, if you can't get in, um, and they don't offer curbside voting, or you don't want to use curbside voting, sometimes you're not required to use curbside voting. It's simply an option.
And just something I'll add really quick is that the Election Protection Hotline, they have several languages available. So they have English, Spanish, and a couple other languages. And also you can chat with them. So um, we'll include that in our follow-up. We'll include the website so you can learn more about that hotline.
They do a good job, by the way.
Yeah.
I've heard some of their the results of their calls and what they've been able to accomplish, and I'd say most of the time they can get it straightened out.
Okay. Someone wanted to clarify when we were talking about help, needing help at a polling place. They wanted to clarify, did you say that someone from both parties, Democrat and Republican, helps you, or one or the other? I think you said both.
Yes, I did say both because
Mhm.
it's just a way to confirm that everything is done properly. So if you want direct assistance but did not bring anybody with you, and that's again your choice, not anybody else's,
Mhm.
then yes, you will have a Democrat and a Republican in the voting booth with you, helping you mark the ballot. And I've actually used that system before, not recently, but I have used it.
Mhm. And this is a question that's come up before to directly asked to me when I was talking with first time or young voters with disabilities. They said, "Oh, I didn't realize I could bring someone. I felt nervous about voting because I thought I had to do it alone." But just to clarify, you can bring someone with you and you don't have to tell them what your disability is or why.
That's correct.
Yeah, like you don't
You're
have to
not
disclose or prove anything.
That's correct.
Mhm.
Now, I will say a couple of the little things here about that. You may be asked why you're doing it, and you can just say, I have a disability, and you don't have to disclose anymore. And that would be, I wouldn't be surprised if you're asked that just so, because they're very careful nowadays with elections, as we all know. So
Mhm.
you might be asked that, but just saying I have a disability, you don't have to say anything more. The other thing that's come up, and it may or may not apply to this audience, some people want to bring an assistive device to help them vote, and you can do that. I do, although this is not required, I would say on a practical level, if it's not something obvious like a set of headphones or something of that nature, you might want to just briefly give an overview to the poll workers, what you have. I'm just saying I'm
Mhm.
going to be using this because you don't want anybody to misinterpret what you're trying to do. Remember, election security nowadays is a very hot topic in our society. So just take a couple minutes. You don't have to go into detail. Just say, this device helps me do this, and that's, just so the poll workers know what's going on. And I don't think you'll have any trouble, but I think if you just go in there cold and start doing it, they might be a little concerned what's going on.
League of Women Voters has a really great accessibility page on the website where you can review all of the things that we talked about today. And save that number, that 866 our vote. Save that number so you have it with you ready just in case and make a plan ahead of time. Um,
Yeah, that's another thing I've had several people say, "Oh, I didn't know I could bring my own set of notes in." They thought you had to memorize what you wanted and come in cold like that. You didn't. I've been taking notes, bringing them in for years and years and years, and I have them on a piece of paper, not electronic, but you can do them electronic as well. Like I said earlier, what you can bring in, assistive equipment. But there is no problem at all bringing your notes because some of these ballots, you just can't remember all the details. And having a plan, like Hannah said, taking notes, I want to vote this candidate, I want to vote this way on that ballot issue, whatever it is, And then you go in there and it makes it so much easier because you don't have to study anything. You just look, all right, I'm voting this, 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 and you just go down the line and get it
Hmm.
submitted.
That's why having a sample ballot ahead of time is so, so helpful because you can really, you take all of the stress out of making your decision. You have it
Exactly.
planned out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you can take time to, all right, I don't know anything about this candidate A. Maybe I'll go look up at his or her website and see what he or she
Mhm.
represents. And that's being an educated voter, and that's really important.
I'll give a couple of shout outs. So we do have an election coming up August 4th, and the deadline to register is July 8th. And then we have an election on November 3rd, and the deadline to register is October 7th for the upcoming two big elections. So be
Yeah.
prepared for those.
Well, just the August one is the primary, but we do
Mhm.
have ballot issues on it, and the November one is the general election. And so that's when, final candidate decisions are made, and we'll have ballot issues on that one as well.
Mhm.
If you've not voted in a while or haven't voted before, you will have to present a valid ID. This is going to be, for those of you that drive, a driver's license most likely. A passport is another example. Or in my case, I have a Missouri ID. It's issued by the same agency that issues driver's license. So you do have to present an ID, a valid ID. You cannot use a student ID in Missouri. Um, so if you don't have an ID or having trouble with an ID, this is not a league organization, but there is an ID coalition that helps people that are having trouble obtaining their birth certificate or other things they need to get an ID. So if you don't have an ID, you definitely have to have this to vote.
Thank you. That's a really good reminder for everyone. So you've got some time to make sure that you have your ID and you have a plan to vote. As always, you can reach out to St. Louis ARC if you have questions, and there we have an advocacy email address, and that is advocacy@slark.org. So feel free if you need support with making a plan or registering or anything else, feel free to do that.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And just keep in mind that an informed voter always does a much better job. So I know it's not always easy to take the time to research and do the reading and everything else, but this stuff ultimately is very important. And again, thank you so much for having me.